So apparently Hulk Hogan is a liar, a fraud, a guy who just makes up stuff for no reason because it's not like pro wrestling is built on larger than life personas or anything. No, Hogan is different. Hogan is the worst because according to the internet wrestling experts, his lies weren't just exaggerations. Yes, they were apparently delusions. They were insults to our intelligence, and therefore he should be banned from wrestling history and forced to walk the earth in shame. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we gather today to illuminate the intricate narrative of Terry Gene Bollea, a man whose alter ego, Hulk Hogan, became a global phenomenon. We are not here to meticulously dissect every word spoken, but to understand the context, the culture, and the man behind the persona. We will address the accusations of lies, exaggerations that have cast a shadow over his legacy and demonstrate that these were not acts of malicious deception but strategic performances within the unique theatre of professional wrestling and entertainment. This is Unpopular Defense, and I stand before you to defend an icon, a man whose narrative is as complex and layered as the industry he helped shape. We will show the accusations against him are often taken out of context and that his actions were often the result of the unique culture he worked in. Let us first immerse ourselves in a world where Mr. Bollea thrived. Professional wrestling. This is not a sport in the traditional sense, it's a performance art, a grand theatrical production. To apply the rigid standards of factual reporting to this domain is fundamentally flawed. To quote Hulk Hogan himself, I slammed him in front of 93,000 people, brother. Nobody has ever done that before. Let us first consider the narrative surrounding Andre the Giant. The claim that Andre had never been slammed before WrestleMania 3. This was a narrative crafted by WWE, a company whose business model hinges on hyperbole and spectacle. It was storytelling, a theatrical device designed to amplify the drama of the moment, not a sworn statement of historical accuracy. The commentary, promotional material, and video packages all pushed this as history in the making. At the time, kayfabe, the idea of protecting the illusion of wrestling, was still very much alive. Wrestlers weren't supposed to break character or contradict the company's narrative. If Hogan had admitted in 1987 that others had slammed Andre before, he would have broken kayfabe and hurt the company's marketing strategy. As WWE's top star, it was his role to reinforce the company's storytelling in interviews, promos, and media appearances. The business was still operating under an old school wrestling mentality, where protecting the illusion was seen as part of the job. Even decades later, Hogan likely continued saying it out of habit, because it was the version of history that WWE had already drilled into the public's mind. Hulk Hogan is also quoted of saying he weighed over 700 pounds when I slammed him. And regarding Andre's weight, often exaggerated to near mythical proportions, the question arises, was Andre pushing 700 pounds that night? The precise number is inconsequential. The point was the sheer magnitude of the feat, the creation of a legendary moment, a moment etched in not just WWE's history, but wrestling history. Imagine it now. Every single person that thinks of wrestling has a moment that they will always remember. This is one of those moments for millions of people around the world that they cannot get out of their head. Andre's size was his gimmick, the eighth wonder of the world. Just like boxing promoters exaggerate fighters' reach, height, or records, WWE inflated Andre's weight to make him seem even more unbeatable. Andre's real weight was a mystery, likely even to himself. Unlike most athletes, Andre never regularly weighed himself. His weight fluctuated massively in the 80s, and by 1987 he had serious health issues causing further changes. Some sources say Andre was close to 500 pounds at WrestleMania 3, but unfortunately there's no official number. Hogan could have genuinely believed Andre was heavier than reported. After all, who was lifting him? The myth made the moment more iconic. If Hogan had said Andre was just 500 pounds, would the moment have been as legendary? Maybe, maybe not. WWE used mythology to sell WrestleMania 3. This was the impossible moment. The bigger Andre sounded, the more impressive Hogan's feat became. Fans were not tuning in for precision. They wanted a spectacle, drama, and history. On this event, Hulk Hogan also quoted, "We had 93,000 fans jam-packed into the Silverdome." This is another exaggeration thrown at Hogan's feet, even though WWE itself pushed the number for decades. Even today, WWE inflates attendance figures. It's called promotion. Look at the Royal Rumble. They always say it is the biggest Rumble in history every single year, even if the numbers don't back it up. The culture of kayfabe further illuminates this context. In the 80s, maintaining the illusion was paramount. Wrestlers were expected to remain in character at all times, to perpetuate storylines, to protect the image. Mr. Blair, as Hulk Hogan, was expected to reinforce the company's narrative, even if they deviated from strict factual accuracy. Let us take a moment away from Mr. Blair and focus on Mark Calloway, Undertaker, a man who for decades was presented as having supernatural powers. When asked if he was truly undead, he was expected to maintain the illusion. This wasn't lying, it was adhering to the rules of the performance. This was the expectation. This was the job. Imagine if The Undertaker broke character and said, "No, it's all fake." It would destroy the entire illusion. I think it is really important to consider the curtain call incident. The curtain call was an infamous moment in professional wrestling history that took place on May 19, 1996 at Madison Square Garden during a WWE house show. It involved 4 members of the Backstage faction known as The Clique: Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Scott Hall, known as Razor Ramon, and Kevin Nash, known as Diesel, breaking kayfabe in front of a live audience. Why did this happen? Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were leaving WWE for WCW after signing lucrative contracts with Ted Turner's promotion. Since this was their final night in WWE, the Clique wanted to give them a send-off in the ring, which was unheard of at the time because heels and babyfaces were supposed to stay separate in public. How it happened? After the main event, Shawn Michaels, a face, and Diesel, a heel, finished their match. Then Triple H, a heel, and Razor Ramon, a face, joined them in the ring. Instead of attacking each other, as kayfabe would dictate, they hugged and raised each other's hands, breaking character in front of thousands of fans. It was one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. It sent shockwaves through the industry. For generations, breaking kayfabe was the cardinal sin, a betrayal of the audience and the business. Before this, such an action was unthinkable. The curtain call shattered this tradition, offering a glimpse behind the curtain and altering the performer-audience relationship. Hulk Hogan, rooted in this era, saw kayfabe as a sacred oath. His reluctance to break it stemmed from respect for the industry's history. It was a reflection of his culture, where reality and performance were blurred. The curtain call signaled a transition towards a modern era. However, for those like Hogan, forged in kayfabe, the old ways remained ingrained, a matter of habit and respect. Claims of 24-inch pythons or record-breaking crowds were not intended as literal truths. They were part of the spectacle, the language of wrestling, a lexicon of magnificence. Characters like The Undertaker, with his supernatural persona, and wrestlers like Jake the Snake Roberts, with their menacing promos, demonstrate the theatrical nature of the industry. This exaggeration was not unique to Jake or The Undertaker. It was the foundation of WWE's biggest events. WrestleMania was built on spectacle. Consider WrestleMania 6, Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. The match was presented as the ultimate challenge, the meeting of two unstoppable forces. The build up wasn't just about a wrestling match, it was about two titans colliding. It was mythological in scale. Similar to this, a year before, at WrestleMania 5, Hulk Hogan vs Macho Man Randy Savage was billed as the Mega Powers Explode. The story leading up to it was full of larger than life drama, betrayal, and emotion. The promos from both men made it feel like a battle of destiny. It wasn't just a wrestling match, it was an epic saga, a Hollywood blockbuster. Wrestling in the 80s thrived on this kind of hyperbole. It was about creating moments that fans would remember forever. The wrestlers weren't just performers, no, they were superheroes, gladiators, and comic book characters brought to life. Hogan's words didn't change the fact he really did slam a massive injured Andre in front of 93,000 fans. The moment was real, even if the numbers were exaggerated. Today, the internet allows people to fact check everything, but wrestling was never about facts. The problem is that modern audiences apply today's standards to an 80s industry built on theatricality. People mock Hogan for his lies, but they're judging him as if he were giving a scientific report. Rather than that, he's selling a story. The same fans who mock Hogan for exaggerating Andre's weight, the attendance figures, and having never slammed him before, would have loved the storytelling back in the 80s. They're applying today's reality-based mindset to an industry that was built on illusion, spectacle, and entertainment. Now let's address the issue of backstage politics and the related claims of exaggerated injuries. These are complex aspects of professional wrestling often misunderstood, but crucial to understanding Mr. Blair's context. Professional wrestling, particularly in his era, was a cutthroat business, similar to any high-stakes competitive industry. Power dynamics were not merely present, they were a defining feature. To suggest that Mr. Blair engaged in backstage politics is not to accuse him of a unique moral failing. It was rather a reflection of the industry's reality. Wrestlers, like any performers, sought to maintain their position, to secure their livelihood. This was not about malice, but about survival in a highly competitive environment. Think of Shawn Michaels, a wrestler often cited for his political maneuvering. He wielded significant influence backstage, using it to secure top spots in matches and storylines. Bret Hart, for instance, had a well-documented rivalry with Michaels, a rivalry that extended beyond the ring and directly influenced their on-screen performances. This led to the ultimate unprofessional match in wrestling history known as the Montreal Screwjob. Then there's SummerSlam 2002, a match that further proves Hogan wasn't the egomaniac many claim he was. He faced Shawn Michaels in a dream match that should have been a wrestling classic, but Michaels took it upon himself to sabotage their match with absurd overselling. This was a case of actual backstage politics at play, but not from Hogan. Michaels exaggerated every move in an attempt to make Hogan look foolish. But Hogan, he didn't break character, didn't get rattled, he stayed professional and did what was asked of him. If anyone came out that match looking petty, it wasn't Hogan. The same critics who blast Hogan for supposed backstage power plays should take a hard look at how Michaels acted that night. Let's talk about the curtain call incident again. Triple H, who had been scheduled to win the King of the Ring later that year, was the one who bore the brunt of the punishment. Meanwhile, Michaels, the then WWE champion, suffered no repercussions, a clear indication of how backstage influence dictated outcomes. This highlights the hypocrisy in how people view Hogan's political maneuvering. Hogan is often singled out for playing politics, but the reality is every major name in wrestling did the same. Michaels, Triple H, Ric Flair, Steve Austin, The Rock, Cena, Reigns have all engaged in similar career-boosting tactics. Mr. Blair, as a top star, was expected to navigate this landscape. It was part of the unspoken rule of the game. Furthermore, it's important to remember the wrestling business at that time was controlled by a very small group of people. The top stars held significant influence, and if they disliked a storyline or wrestler, changes were made. This was the environment in which Mr. Blair operated. Within this environment, exaggerations and embellishments were commonplace, not just in promos, but also in recounting past events. Take, for example, the incident where Mr. Blair claimed to have broken his ribs wrestling The Rock at WrestleMania 18, when in fact it was Rikishi. Always claimed the Undertaker's tombstone powerdriver broke his neck. The quote, "The Undertaker grabbed me again and flipped me over and dropped my head on the metal chair in the nastiest tombstone of all tombstone." These weren't necessarily malicious lies, but could be interpreted as a reflection of the culture he was immersed in. It's also plausible that early in his career, Mr. Blair was on the receiving end of such exaggerations and backstage manipulations. This could have been a way for established stars to keep him on his toes, to assert their dominance and maintain the status quo. It was a form of initiation, a way to learn the harsh realities of the business. Therefore, both the backstage politics and the exaggerated injury claims are best understood within the context of the wrestling industry's culture. They were not isolated incidents of deception, but rather reflections of the norms and practices that defined the era. Hogan had to navigate an environment where loyalty, alliances, and political maneuvering determined careers. If he used his influence, it was not out of personal greed, but out of necessity. Wrestlers who didn't protect their spots often found themselves replaced, pushed down the cart, or phased out entirely. Every major name in wrestling had to play this game. Let's move on to another attack thrown at him. The idea that Hogan does not do the job, which means he does not put talent over. Hogan buried talent? Yeah, tell that to Goldberg, who pinned him clean in front of 40,000 fans and instantly became WCW's biggest star. Or Lesnar, who annihilated Hogan in 2002, leaving him in a bloody mess and refusing to even pin him. He just choked him out like a predator playing with his food. Ultimate Warrior? Hogan didn't just lose to him, he handed him the WWF Championship in the main event of WrestleMania. Let's talk about Kurt Angle. Hogan tapped out, something he almost never did, just to make Angle look like a submission machine. That man lost when it mattered, he made careers, and yet people still act like he was politicking his way through every match. Let's talk about arguably his greatest job. At WrestleMania X8, Hulk Hogan faced The Rock in what became one of the most legendary matches of all time. Just observe the crowd in that match to truly comprehend this. Despite being booked as the heel, Hogan won over the crowd in such a way that WWE had no choice but to turn him face again. But, more importantly, Hogan did what was best for business. He lost clean to The Rock. This wasn't just a standard pinfall, it was Hogan using his legendary status to solidify The Rock as the next guy for the new generation. If Hogan was truly the backstage manipulator who refused to put over new talent, why would he have willingly laid down in one of the biggest matches of his career? The answer is simple. Because he understood the business. The narrative that Hogan never passed the torch is completely shattered by this match alone. To bring it back to Andre the Giant, he was rarely slammed on live TV before WrestleMania 3, so the moment was made iconic because of this. This was the same logic here, that whenever Hogan lost, he absolutely made a star out of the winner. People love to act like Hulk Hogan was single-handedly responsible for WCW's downfall. They'll throw out words like politics, creative control, and burying talent as if Hogan was the only one playing the game. Before Hogan signed in '94, WCW wasn't exactly setting a world on fire. It was a company that had great wrestling but zero mainstream appeal. Ric Flair was their man, but the business wasn't booming. Then Hogan comes in and suddenly WCW finally becomes a legitimate threat to WWE. He brings in mainstream attention that WCW never had before. Within 2 years, Monday Nitro is launched, beating Monday Night Raw for 83 weeks straight. Was Hogan playing politics? Of course, but so was everyone else. Kevin Nash was booking himself on top. Ric Flair had influence. WCW management gave the wrestlers too much say, and it turned into chaos. The real death of WCW? It wasn't Hogan, or politics, or the NWO running too long. It was a corporate merger. When Time Warner took over, they didn't want wrestling anymore. WCW's downfall was never about one person. It was about bad business. And if it was about one person, there are about 5 other people that can be blamed before Hulk Hogan. A lot of people believe that Hulk Hogan suing WCW was wrong, without actually understanding the lawsuit. The WCW era of Vince Russo featured full soap, lackluster results, and a world of controversy, but nothing defined that chaos more than Bash at the Beach 2000, the night Hulk Hogan walked out and sued WCW. And when you look at the facts, it's clear that Hogan was right to do so. Let's break this down. Hogan had a creative control clause in his WCW contract, meaning he had the final say in how he was booked. This wasn't a privilege, it was a legally binding agreement that WCW willingly signed. Originally, the plan was for Hogan to win the title from Jeff Jarrett, setting up a future angle, but Vince Russo had other plans. What happened next wasn't just a change in creative direction, it was a direct violation of Hogan's contract. Jarrett famously laid down for Hogan, creating confusion among fans who weren't following backstage politics. Hogan walked out with the belt as per the agreed upon plan. But then, Russo returned to the ring and buried Hogan in a shocking, profanity-laced promo, completely deviating from what had been discussed. He publicly disrespected Hogan and falsely painted him as someone who refused to do business. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was defaming. Hogan had every right to be furious. Russo's promo wasn't just an angle, it was a direct attempt to damage Hogan's reputation. If a company signs a contract and then publicly humiliates the person they made a deal with, there have to be consequences. Hogan wasn't just protecting his ego, he was standing up for a contractual integrity in an industry that often mistreats its talents. Hogan sued WCW for breach of contract and defamation. The case revolved around whether Russo's words were targeting Hulk Hogan, the character, or Terry Bollea, the man. The jury ruled in WCW's favour, but let's be real, this was a technicality. The damage was already done, and within months, WCW collapsed on its own mismanagement. The reality is, Hogan's lawsuit wasn't just about himself, it was a warning to every wrestler. If companies can ignore contracts whenever they want, no one is safe. So was Hogan right to sue? Absolutely. This wasn't just another case of backstage politics, this was about professionalism, integrity, and the importance of honouring agreements. And when WCW failed to do it, it only sped up its inevitable downfall. Another quote by Hogan that people take out of context and ridicule him with is when he said, "I wrestled 400 days in 1 year because I travelled back and forth to Japan, gaining extra days due to the time difference." Now let's address the claim that he wrestled 400 days in a year. On the surface, this statement appears mathematically impossible, and it's understandable that it's drawn scrutiny. However, we must consider the context of professional wrestling and the way Mr. Blair might have been expressing himself. Firstly, wrestling schedules are notoriously grueling. In Mr. Blair's era, wrestlers often worked multiple shows per day, travelled across time zones, and endured a relentless pace. This lifestyle can lead to a distorted perception of time. Secondly, consider the use of hyperbole. In the world of wrestling, exaggeration is not merely accepted, it's expected. Wrestlers are storytellers, and they often use hyperbole to emphasize the intensity of their experiences. When Mr. Blair said 400 days, he was likely not attempting to provide a literal count. He was conveying the overwhelming, seemingly endless nature of his schedule. Think of it this way. When someone says, I've worked 1,000,000 hours this week, are they being literal? No, they are expressing the feeling of being overworked. Mr. Blair's statement serves a similar purpose. He was conveying the sense of a schedule that felt impossibly long, a schedule that blurred the lines between days and nights. The entire wrestling business is built on selling yourself as larger than life. People do not want to hear, yeah, I wrestled a normal amount. No, they want to hear, brother, I was everywhere. Japan, Europe, the States, day, night, and never stopped. Furthermore, the constant travel across time zones can create a sense of lost time or extra time. A wrestler might perform in one city, fly across several different time zones, and perform again on the same calendar day, essentially experiencing a compressed version of time. While it doesn't literally add days to the year, it can contribute to a feeling of an extended schedule. Finally, it's worth noting that Mr. Blair had a long and eventful career. It's possible that over time, his memories have become conflated, and he's used this hyperbole to illustrate the sheer volume of work he's completed. Therefore, while the 400 days remark is factually inaccurate, it's not necessarily a malicious lie. It's more like an example of hyperbole, a way to express the extreme demands of his career. It's a way to express the feeling of a life lived at the impossible pace. It's a storyline device and not a mathematical equation. Now, let's address a more serious matter. I trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. I am not a steroid abuser. That quote right there, people love to use it to tear down Hulk Hogan. They act like he was a mastermind behind an entire industry's drug culture. They bring up his infamous 91 talk show interview. They point to his testimony in court. They act like WWE's legal battles were all about him. But let's set the record straight. Hogan did not create wrestling steroids problem. He was a symptom of a much bigger issue, one that WWE, Vince McMahon, and the entire industry had long before Hogan became a star. People act like Hogan introduced steroids into wrestling. That's nonsense, because steroid use in wrestling goes back to the 60s and 70s. When bodybuilder physiques became the norm, guys like superstar Billy Graham and other 70 icons were already using them to get ahead. By the time Hogan became a star, steroids were the industry standard. They were not just accepted, they were expected. This wasn't a Hulk Hogan problem. This was a systematic problem. A lot of people do not realize this, but steroids weren't even classified as a controlled substance in the US until the Controlled Substances Act in the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 1990. Before that, you could literally buy them with a doctor's prescription, and in some cases even over the counter. Hogan admitted to using steroids in the 80s. But guess what? So was every other top wrestler. If something isn't illegal, can you really call it cheating? It was just part of the business at the time. But what if everyone was using them? How did this become a scandal? Enter Dr. George Zahorian. Dr. Zahorian was a ringside physician for WWE, and more importantly, he was the guy wrestlers went for steroids. For years, Zahorian provided anabolic steroids and other drugs to countless wrestlers. He wasn't just giving them out, he was pushing them like a street dealer. But in 1991, the federal government came after him hard. He was arrested and convicted for illegally distributing steroids. This is when the dominoes started falling. During Zahorian's trial, his record showed he had supplied steroids to top WWE stars, including Hogan. Suddenly, the government had a reason to dig even deeper. But who did it go after? Not Hogan. A lot of people believe he was the one charged. incorrect. Vince McMahon was charged. McMahon was charged by the US Attorney for the Eastern District of New York with routinely obtaining anabolic steroids for his stable of strongmen and employing a shady doctor with an easy hand on prescription to ensure regular shipments of juice to his wrestlers. The prosecution's goal? To prove that McMahon was running an operation where WWE talent had to take steroids to stay on top. This was huge. If convicted, McMahon was facing up to 8 years in prison. The government wanted to make an example out of wrestling, and to do that they needed their biggest star, Hulk Hogan, to turn on Vince. And this is where Hogan actually saved McMahon. In July 94, Hogan took the stand and admitted that he had used steroids for over a decade. But he also made it clear that McMahon never forced him or anyone else to use them. That testimony destroyed the government's case. Without evidence that McMahon was coercing wrestlers into steroid use, the jury had no choice but to acquit him. McMahon walked away a free man. Here's the thing. McMahon walked away a free man, yet Hogan took all the heat. The media ran wild with the story. Fans felt betrayed. The quote, "Say your prayers, eat your vitamins," guy had been exposed. And just like that, Hogan's image was damaged forever. Never mind that every top wrestler at the time was doing the same thing. Never mind that Vince was actually the one on trial. But because Hogan was the face of WWE, he became the face of the steroid scandal. So let's be real here. Hulk Hogan was not the villain people make him out to be. Did he use steroids? Yes. So did every top wrestler of his era. Did he lie about it first? Yeah. But so did a lot of guys. That was just the culture of that time. But was he the mastermind behind wrestling's steroid problem? Absolutely not. WWE had a steroid culture long before Hogan, remember? The industry, the promoters, and even the government played a role in creating that environment. The only reason Hogan took the fall because he was too famous. So the next time someone brings up the steroid scandal, ask them this: why did Vince McMahon get charged but Hogan got the blame? Because the truth is, Hogan wasn't the villain. He was the scapegoat. At the outset, let me make one thing clear. Hulk Hogan is far from perfect. He's made mistakes, some bigger than others. He said things he wishes he could take back. He's played the game of professional wrestling like everyone else who's ever made it to the top. But does that add up to the level of hate he receives today? Does that justify their action when he returned to Raw? No. Something interesting has happened over the years. The same fans who once hung on his every word, who cheered as he slammed Andre, who lived and breathed Hulkamania, many of them now lead the charge against him. The same industry that he carried on his back now treats him like a villain. Why? Because Hulk Hogan became bigger than professional wrestling itself, and some people did not like this. Hogan has been accused of many things. He played politics. Every top guy has. He stayed past his prime. So have countless others. He embellished stories. Tell me a wrestler who hasn't. Did Hogan lie about wrestling 400 days a year? Yes, but the real number was still over 300 days. But he became the scapegoat, the face of an era people wanted to move past, the easy target for every criticism about the industry. But do not be fooled. This isn't just about Hogan. This is about the nature of wrestling itself. Because when a legend reaches a certain height, the world looks for ways to bring them down. It's not enough to acknowledge the flaws. People want to erase the accomplishments, rewrite history, pretend that Hulk Hogan didn't build this industry into what it is today. But you are empowered. You, the jury, decide what lives on. No matter how much people try to diminish his name, Hogan's legend won't rest in peace. His influence endures forever. Hogan was the head of the table, the cornerstone upon which wrestling built its global empire. Hogan didn't just finish the story, he wrote the story, and everything that followed in wrestling is the chapter he set in motion. So ask yourself, are you judging a man or are you following the crowd? Are you condemning Hulk Hogan because of what he's actually done or because you've been told you should? Because it's popular to do that. Because history is not erased so easily. The truth is not rewritten because of boos in an arena. And when the dust settles, whether you cheer or boo, one thing will always remain. Hulk Hogan was the most iconic figure in wrestling, is the foundation of wrestling, and always will be the cornerstone of wrestling. And that, my friends, is the bottom line. So what are you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you? The truth is not always popular, but it's always worth defending. This is Unpopular Defense.